Late on November 23rd, 2024, the parents of 17-year-old Milena Shevalieva hadn't been able to contact her for hours, and that wasn't like her. She was meant to be at home, looking after the family farm while they were away on business. But now, there was nothing. No calls, no messages, just silence. Worried, her parents reached out to her boyfriend, 18-year-old Vladimir Bedny, who lived nearby, and they asked him to check on her. Vladimir tried calling first, but there was no answer. That's when he decided to head over. By the time he arrived, it was already dark. The house was quiet, no lights on. He knocked on the door and waited, but there was no answer. It didn't make sense. Milena wouldn't just ignore him, not like this. He moved around to her bedroom window, but she wasn't there. That's when he thought to check the farm. As he made his way over, he heard movement coming from the pig pen. Using just the light from his phone, he stepped inside. The gate was open, the pigs were out, and then he saw her. Milena was lying on the ground, surrounded by blood. Her face had been mauled beyond recognition. Vladimir froze, trying to process what he was looking at, and then he ran. At first, it looked like a terrible accident, but in reality, something far more sinister had taken place. This is one of those cases where the person responsible came close to getting away with it. Very close. And what happened to Milena was just horrific. But before we dive in, if you find this video as unsettling as I did, then please drop it a like and leave me a comment below. And if you are new here, then please hit the subscribe button and consider following me on Instagram. It all really helps. Thank you. Milena Shevalieva was born in 2007 and spent her entire life in a small, isolated village in Krasnoyarsk Krai, deep in Siberia. It was the kind of place where everything moved slowly, where everyone knew each other, and most families lived off the land. Her father managed a local farm that supported most of the village, and from a young age, Milena was part of that life. She grew up around livestock, with the long days and routine, helping out not because she had to, but because she wanted to. As she got older, it just became normal to her. By the time she was a teenager, that responsibility had grown. She was someone her parents trusted, often leaving her in charge of the farm when they needed to travel. She did have an older brother, though he lived in a neighbouring town, so a lot of that responsibility fell onto her. At school, she was just a normal student, quiet and polite, not top of the class, but never causing problems either. The kind of person teachers didn't have to worry about. People in the village spoke well of her, and the family were also respected. They lived a good life, and they were reasonably wealthy for the area that they lived in. Milena didn't really leave the area. She was very much a country girl, and she had no reason to. Milena also had a boyfriend from a nearby village called Vladimir Bedny. He was someone she'd met not long before everything happened. They were very much in love, and it was an innocent relationship. They would hang out and go on dates, just two young people in love. They never ventured far, as like everything else in her life, it all stayed within the same small world she'd never really left. On November 23rd, 2024, Milena's parents set off early to Krasnoyarsk to sell meat from the farm. It was part of how they made a living, and trips like this weren't unusual. But in a place like Siberia, not unusual doesn't mean quick. Distances out there are massive. Getting to the nearest city isn't a short drive. It can take hours, sometimes days. And once you're gone, you're gone. Turning around isn't simple. So when they left that morning, Milena wasn't just home for a bit. She was properly on her own. Back at the farm, everything was down to her. The animals, the chores, all of it, but she'd done it before. She knew how everything worked and knew what needed doing. Through the day, she stayed in contact with her parents, sending small updates, letting them know how things were going. Nothing out of the ordinary, just another day on the farm. But the thing about being that isolated is if something does go wrong, there's no one close to notice it, no one passing, no one checking in. And as the evening set in and those messages stopped coming through, that distance suddenly started to matter a lot more. By that point, the unease had already set in. Melina's mother had been trying to reach her for hours, and something wasn't sitting right. It wasn't like her to ignore calls. At first, it was easy to brush off. Maybe she was busy, maybe she hadn't heard it. But the longer it went on, the harder it became to believe. Eventually, her mother started to think something more serious may have happened, and that's when she called Melina's boyfriend, Vladimir. She asked him to go over and check on her. This is where he would eventually discover the remains of Melina. Vladimir ran out of the building, across the yard, straight to the nearest houses, shouting, panicked, barely able to get words out. People came out to see what was going on. They followed him back to the farm, trying to understand what had happened. And when they saw her for themselves, everything changed. Emergency services were called, but in a place like that, help doesn't arrive quickly. There's distance and delay, and all anyone could do in that moment was wait. But there was already nothing they could really do. Melina was clearly dead. The police and paramedics only made it official when they arrived at the scene. Somewhere in the middle of all that, her parents were called back. They were still far away, hours from home, now being told something had gone terribly wrong. And as the word spread, the entire village began to gather, trying to make sense of it, trying to understand how something like this could happen there. At first, it looked like a tragic accident. Investigators focused on the farm itself, the animals, the environment. One theory was that something had gone wrong in the pigsty, that an aggressive sow had knocked Melina down, causing her to hit her head and lose consciousness, and that the rest of the pigs attacked her after. But there was another detail that didn't quite fit. The gate to the bull's enclosure had also been left open, so a second theory began to form, that one of the bulls had entered the corridor and struck her, knocking her unconscious, leaving her defenseless before the pigs moved in. Either way, the explanation pointed in the same direction, a terrible accident, and for a moment, that's exactly what it looked like. Melina's body showed extensive bite injuries. Her face had been badly mauled, and she was missing a finger on one of her hands. But when forensic results came back, it became clear what had actually killed her. It wasn't the head injury, it was blood loss. A bite to her leg had torn into the femoral artery, one of the body's main blood vessels, and that's what caused her to die. And the worst part, according to the examination, she was still alive when the attack began. Everything pointed towards a terrible accident. That was the assumption investigators worked with in the early stages. The farm, along with the injuries and the animals, it all seemed to fit. In a place like that, with large livestock and isolated conditions, something going wrong wasn't impossible. It was tragic, but it was understandable. But this theory didn't hold for long. When Melina's body was forensically examined, things started to stand out. The injuries didn't line up with what they were seeing at the farm. They didn't match a fall or an animal attack. The investigators discovered that she'd been hit on the head with a blunt object, and also that she had been forced upon. This was no longer just an accident. The investigation now turned criminal. And if this wasn't an accident, then someone had to be there. And the first person the police needed to speak to was the one who found her. Melina's boyfriend was brought in and questioned. It was standard procedure. He had gone to the farm, he had been to the scene, and he was one of the last people connected to her that day. Naturally, that put him under immediate scrutiny. Investigators pressed him on everything: where he'd been, what time he arrived, and what he'd seen. But his story didn't change. He had been at home until Melina's mother had called him. He went straight to the farm, and what he described matched what was later confirmed. There was no evidence placing him at the scene before that moment, no signs he had been involved, and as quickly as suspicion had fallen on him, it began to move elsewhere. Attention started to turn towards the people who had access to the farm. In a village that small, there aren't many, and that's when Igor Zhikov's name began to come up. He worked there, lived nearby, and knew the place inside out. At first, it was just that, nothing more than proximity. But then something else came in. His partner, Vitaly Erbyazhin, who also worked on the farm, spoke to police. She said that Igor had come back from the farm with visible scratches on his face around the same time that everything had happened. The scratches were fresh, and he hadn't really explained them. His behaviour had also been off, not how he usually was, enough for it to cause concern. None of it on its own proved anything, but together it was enough. Enough for investigators to start looking at him directly, because now they had someone who knew the farm, had been there at the right time, and was starting to give people around him a reason to talk. Igor already had a past. Years earlier, he'd been convicted for killing his own brother during a drunken argument. He stabbed him multiple times and ended up serving around 5 years in prison before being released in 2007. After that, it didn't really stop. There were more offences: theft, robbery, smaller things, but enough to show a pattern. He was known locally as someone with a short temper, someone who could turn quickly. He also drank a lot, and it caused problems for him throughout his life. He was in a long-term relationship with Vitaly, and both of them worked on Melina's family farm. In the past, Vitaly had her own run-ins with the law, but by this point, she was seen as more stable. Igor wasn't. There had been problems building for a while. He'd turn up to work drunk, struggle to do what was asked of him, and kept causing issues. Melina's father had to pull him up on it more than once, and it never ended well. But Igor didn't see it like that. To him, it wasn't about his drinking or about his behaviour. He saw it as disrespect, like he was being spoken down to, made to look small in front of others. And instead of taking it on board, he held on to it. That resentment just sat there, getting worse over time. Normally, someone like that would have been let go, but it wasn't that simple, because firing him wouldn't just affect him, it would also affect Vitaly as well, and he didn't want her to suffer because of Igor. So instead, he was kept on and given more chances. But the situation wasn't improving, and it wasn't going to hold forever. And eventually, it didn't. By November 27th, 4 days after Melina was found, police went to Igor's house and arrested him. He didn't resist, he just went with them. But why had he gone to the farm in the first place? Because this hadn't come out of nowhere. By that point, in his head, his dispute with Melina's father had turned into something personal, and he decided to act upon it. Not by going after Melina's father directly, but by going after what mattered to him: the farm, the animals, something that would cause real damage. That was the plan when he made his way there. He was already heavily intoxicated, and he was carrying a log and a knife with him, and he planned to bludgeon as many of the livestock as he could. When he was questioned by police, Igor tried to explain what happened in a way that made it sound sudden. According to him, when he got inside, Melina saw him and reacted. He claimed she ran at him, and that's when things escalated. He said he struck her with a wooden object, knocking her unconscious, and then he left. That was the version he gave, but it doesn't hold up. Because this wasn't something that just got out of hand in the moment. He hadn't ended up there by accident. He'd gone there with a purpose, already angry and looking to cause damage. And when he came face to face with her, that didn't stop him. It just changed the target. The moment he saw her, there was no backing off. Melina tried to escape, but Igor was covering the exit, so she did her best to fight him. She didn't just freeze, she clawed at him, leaving marks across his face that he wouldn't be able to explain later. The struggle between them was chaotic, moving through the pen, knocking things as it went. At some point, the gate holding the bulls gave way, swinging open and letting them out. But by then, it didn't matter. Igor overpowered her. He struck her repeatedly with the log, hard enough to drop her, and eventually she went down, unconscious. It's now where Igor forced himself on Melina, his version of revenge on an innocent young woman, because he had fallen out with her father. Vile. Of course, he later denied doing this. After he knocked her down, he didn't try to help her. He didn't call for anyone. Didn't check if she was okay. Instead, he stopped and thought about what to do next. He knew exactly where he was. He'd worked there. He understood how the animals behaved. He knew the pigs could get rid of all the evidence of his crimes. So he left her in there, in the pen, knowing she could be eaten alive. Igor was formally charged not long after his arrest, and the case moved forward quickly. In court, he tried to change the way everything was seen. He claimed he hadn't intended to kill her, that it wasn't planned, that things escalated in the moment. But that argument didn't hold, because the evidence told a different story. The injuries, what he did after, the decisions he made once she was already down. It all pointed to something far more deliberate, and the court saw it that way. He was found guilty and sentenced to 23 years in a high-security penal colony. But for a crime like this, one that involves so many choices, so many chances to stop, it left people questioning whether the sentence was enough. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane.